goal. Oh, it is another goal.
We're bad and mean, the green machine. We hit them hard, so they see green. We're big and strong, we're fast and lean. That's why we're called the green machine.
And it's that time again. We've got a brand new episode of Hot Tub Rugby League Time Machine. And jumping in the hot tub with me tonight, it's an old mate of mine, a legend of the Picton Magpies Club, but more importantly, he's a good fella. And he's a Canberra Raiders tragic. It's Mr. Matty French making his journalistic return tonight. Welcome back, Frenchie.
G'day, Curtis. Thank you for having me back, mate. I couldn't possibly miss this one.
Yeah, Canberra Raiders. So before we get started, just really quickly, if you can, tell us a bit about the Raiders story for you and how you became a milkman.
Oh, look, it pretty much started with the '89 grand final. So I was, as a youngster, a Parramatta fan, and it was pretty much just because I was following in the footsteps of Dad. Dad went for the Eels, so did I. Now, that was great in the very early days because when you're young and impressionable and, you don't really have any particular reason for watching footy, you just do what the parents do. That was when Parramatta were winning all those grand finals. And then, I was used to that, and then 87 and 88 comes along, and I'm like, oh, hang on, what's all this about? So I was still a fan, and to this day I still have a soft spot for the Eels. But the '89 grand final, a young mate of mine was over at my house on the day, and grand final day was always a massive deal back then, and family barbecue, and the oldies are on the beers, and the youngsters are running around, and my mate and I just we had a bit of a bet. He said he thinks the Almain are going to win, and I think, well, I think that the Canberra Raiders might win. And that was it. And look, the greatest fairy tale finish you could ever imagine. And I was so hyped up by that win that that was it. I was on board from that day forward, and I completely fell in love with them and have been very much so ever since.
I've got a couple of notes just before we get stuck into the '94 season itself. And one that sticks out to me, Frenchie, is Canberra have already, which you just touched on, Canberra have already had this great era between, say, 87, where they went down to Manly in the grand final, at the final grand final at the SCG, and then they go through at about 91. They win a couple of grand finals. They lose a couple as well. But then from there, they then add guys like Mullins, Wiki, Nagus, Nandruku, Ponga, Lomax, David Furner to their squad. I mean, something like maybe some battling Magpies fans out there, or Rabbitohs, or whatever, some battling teams out there from that era might look back and say, well, hang on, how did they get to do all that after the dramas with their salary cap in '91? But at the end of the day, I mean, could you imagine, maybe you might have been a little bit too young to remember that yourself, thinking about it this way, but for maybe older Canberra fans, after seeing what they'd already achieved in those few years, was it imaginable? Like, could they possibly get better? Like, hypothetically, could they get better after '91, which they did do?
Yeah, look, I as a youngster, I can still remember I was always hopeful, and even '92 and '93, they were very inconsistent seasons, and there's no doubt that '92 they took a hit, particularly with the loss of the most dominant front row in the game at the time. Took them a while to rebuild in the in the middle of the field stakes right there. But even still, like I say, 92 and 93, a bit hot and cold, particularly 92. They still played some fantastic footy that year, but I think they finished around about 8th or so. A lot of injuries, which they tended to have. Some of their best players were a little bit injury prone. 93, pretty familiar story for rugby league fans there. They were really ramping up heading into the semis, and then Ricky Stewart went down. He was, the Rothmans medal winner and the Dally M winner of the year. And he went down, and with it was the Canberra Raiders' hopes. But yeah, so look, it wasn't really a surprise. I mean, I guess maybe I was a bit one-eyed at the time, so I was always hoping. You never know whether it's just hope talking or not. But as I say, for me, 94, I could see it coming because I kind of expected us to be there 92 or 93 anyway, so it wasn't a surprise to me. But I imagine for the great rugby league world, especially with the dominance of the Broncos over those 2 years, 92 and 93, maybe it was a little bit of a surprise, but definitely not for me, mate.
Well, you speak about Ricky Stewart's injury. So the Raiders, they're basically going through in 93, either first on the table or really, really close to. Round 21, and French, did you remember the Winfield Cup VHS videos and the 100 magic moments? Oh, how good was it, right? So I tried to find it. I tried to pinpoint the game. So it was very easy to find the injury, the game with Ricky Stewart. I think it was a broken leg or a broken ankle. Canberra won that game against Parramatta 68-0, if you don't mind. Round 21, and I believe, and I couldn't find this online, but the Winfield Cup VHS game that I remember from the highlights that match, a bloke called Trevor Shodel came on the field and scored a try or two himself. That's how bad Parramatta were going and how good Canberra, how much Canberra were rolling. But once Ricky Stewart was out in round 21, as you touched on, Dally M, Rothman's medal, they go to Belmore in round 22. They get smashed by Canterbury 32 points to 8. They miss out on the minor premiership by a single competition point, and they go out in straight sets to the finals without Ricky Stewart. At this time, I was too young to remember, and I wasn't reading the newspapers then. I was only 6 or 7 myself. But at this time, surely, the experts are thinking, the Broncos, they've gone back-to-back now, 92, 93. Ricky Stewart's back for Canberra. The Raiders squad is better than it was in 93. Brett Mullins is coming along. Belcher's now retired. Surely 94, we finally get the Broncos versus Raiders grand final we've all been waiting for.
Yeah, true. That is the big game that just never quite eventuated, did it? For one reason or another, but both teams just weren't up in the same year. And still to this day, when you look back and you talk about who was the most dominant team in the 90s, you can kind of relate it to Parramatta and the Dogs in the 80s.
Yeah.
But sure enough, as the two most dominant sides, they played a couple of great grand finals there. But it just never quite happened for the Raiders and the Broncos. I think the closest they ever came realistically was 97 in Super League. So people probably don't remember that too well.
Yeah.
But even then, the Raiders fell sort of one game short, and it ended up being a Broncos and Sharkies Super League grand final. So we didn't even get one in the Super League there. But, look, actually, it might have been the Broncos and the Bulldogs, such as my memory of that season. But But as you say, mate, Ned just never quite got there. And even this year, I was sort of doing a little bit of revision just earlier today, and I thought, well, how did the Broncos go that year? And they made the semis, but their win-loss record wasn't very good. I think they won about 12 games.
Yeah.
It just wasn't their season in 94 for whatever reason.
And the final note before we get to round 1, 1994, something that I hadn't noticed, but I'm sure Canterbury fans would, is that Canterbury were minor premiers. If Ricky Stewart didn't break his ankle in round 21-93, Canberra probably go very close to beating Canberra at Belmore. Such was his influence on the team. Anyway, so the Dogs win the minor premiership in 93 and 94. Did that probably help them really, really quickly? Because I know we're talking about Raiders 94, but the Bulldogs of that era, I mean, they were there or thereabouts through that whole era. And we talk about the Raiders, we talk about the Broncos, talk about Norse, Magic Run 94, Manly were there, but the Dogs were always lurking as well.
Yeah, they were. They were a really solid team. And it's funny, they ended up getting up in 95, but 95, at least on paper, that team is nowhere near as strong as
they shouldn't have won.
93 and 94 Bulldogs. You look at, particularly, you can sort of compare their forward pack and particularly their back row to a modern NRL team. Just so much skill and so much mobility in that back row. Jason Smith, Dean Pay, Jim Dimmick, They could all ball play like 5'8" and tough as nails too. So, they had everything. They had a really solid roster those few years, and probably were a little bit unlucky to miss out on the grand prize, but obviously got the one that was a little bit overdue in '95.
Well, it's a nice bookend because we're going to finish with obviously the grand final against the Bulldogs a little bit later. But round 1, 1994, it's interesting. The Canberra Raiders, they go to Caltex Field, which is Shark Park. And I always thought as a kid, and I'm sure I heard experts at the time saying that, and I thought this too for Magpies, and even a little bit later with West Tigers as a supporter, is that Shark Park on a Saturday night was one of the hardest road trips in the game. And round 1, 94, the Raiders go down to Cronulla and they drop their first game 24-16. But then from there, looking at the Rugby League Project, which is a fantastic website, the Raiders don't lose back-to-back games all season. And the thing that I've noticed watching the Raiders back, and thank God we've got these retro games we sometimes see on Fox, where you watch Canberra play, and they never really had that, I guess, that ego or swagger that, say, the Broncos had when they came to town. The Raiders were just, they were a super team, and they knew it, and they brought people through the gates, but they were so professional and just got jobs done, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Look, and they were blessed with such a fantastic roster, but as you say, they did have a sort of a different feel about them. Besides, Ricky Stewart, who was as arrogant as you would want a footy player to be, especially when you support them. They didn't really have that kind of we're better than us, or it wasn't as sort of out there and as obvious as it was when you watch the Broncos play. But as you say, they just went about their business. They were very, very methodical and very skillful. But just quickly on the Sharkies, that's a really solid point. They were so hard to beat on a Saturday night at home. My best mate was a Sharks forward and still is. And he would always remind me that, we're playing at Cronulla this week. It's Saturday night. We're going to beat you. Didn't know what position the Sharkies were.
It was a
Canberra
graveyard.
Always struggled to beat them, yeah. And it was, of course, this was in the era before, every game was televised.
Yep.
So when it came to actually scheduling your own home games, you could kind of do it relatively whenever you wanted to, as long as you didn't have to have the TV game. So Cronulla, those home games, didn't matter what part of the year it was, a Saturday night at the Shark Park. That was the only sort of game in town on a Saturday night, and they were hard to beat there. And
another flashback coming back as a kid watching. Remember Sports World on Channel 7 on Sunday morning?
Yeah,
and you kind of and it's like they'll just have the try highlights, and I just always remember they'd say, and Cronulla's beaten someone 30 something to whatever. And it's like one camera up in the main grandstand, and the lighting was never good at Shark Park.
Yeah.
And Eddinghausen always scored a couple, and it was a tough place to play. But interesting that so they dropped their first game, but they also win through the season. They win at a period 9 straight, which includes the first week of the finals against the Bears. But they win 8 straight in the regular season. But the point I want to bring up quickly is that the final Origin game of 94 is on June 20, and then just quickly a couple of dates here. June 26, round 13, they play the Broncos at Bruce in front of 24,000 people, if you don't mind. They pump the Broncos 29-10. Now, I'm assuming back then, like I know I jump on Twitter every weekend, and I look up the ratings on Media Week or whatever it is, and I'm always interested on how the ratings are and how we're going against other sports and all the rest of it. There wasn't such a thing back then, but I would have loved to known back then in 93, 94 particularly, what a game like Broncos versus Raiders on a Friday night would have polled for Channel 9, because it's one of those things where it's like, you hate to see him win against your own side, but it's must watch footy. So how big was a Friday night, Broncos versus Raiders down at Bruce Stadium as a Raiders fan?
Yeah, massive. It didn't get any better. Me personally, my favourite was the Sunday afternoon game, and still is realistically.
Yeah.
But back in those days, that was what you lived for, was the 3 o'clock Sunday arvo. It didn't matter what else was going on the weekend. You made sure you were home for that Sunday arvo game. Whereas the Friday night game, as entertaining as it wasn't as good as it was to watch, under light, it was the kind of thing that you could occasionally just miss. You might forget about it every now and then. So it just wasn't quite as big a deal. But in saying that, particularly these two, like that Canberra-Brisbane game on a Friday night, that was massive. And as you say, coming straight off the back of Origin, New South Wales has just finished winning their third of 3 in a row. And so that kind of would be like a little bit of revenge if the Broncos happen to get that win over the Raiders off the back of that. But as you say, the Raiders stuck it to them again just to rub their noses in a little bit more.
Am I getting my years wrong? Which one was the Brett Mullins? Was like 2 chip and chases and then another boot. Was that game or was that the year before?
Yeah, I think that, I don't know for sure, but I reckon that was that game. Yeah, it was definitely a night game against the Broncos, and 94, that was the year where he really just tore the rugby league world apart. So I'm 99% certain it was that game that you were just talking about, yeah.
Who was your favourite Canberra player in this era, by the way, Frenchie?
My favourite was Laurie Daly, always was. I just really just liked the way he played, like from probably 1990 onwards. He was at that stage. He was a 20-year-old, 5'8", occasional centre still. He was making his way into that sort of full-time 5'8" position. But just like his ability to explode on the ball. He's such a powerhouse runner for a 5'8", and he would bash people in defence as well. And he had a good passing game, kicking game as well. It never really seemed to, like we were talking about before, like the difference between the Canberra and Broncos teams. He never really had that sort of that arrogant sort of swagger. He was the polar opposite of Ricky Stewart in the halves, but they complemented each other so well. And still to my day, to this day, he's still my favourite player ever. But yeah, absolutely. Look at it, and it's hard to choose. For me, it's really a choice of who my second favourite was in that squad. There were so many great ones, but yeah, Laurie Daly was always my favourite.
I don't want to pump him up too much, Frenchie, but there's a certain number 6 at Canberra this year that reminds you a lot of Laurie Daly in the way that his sheer determination to be better than someone else and get to the try line or dominate someone defensively like Laurie Daly used to do. Jack Whiten's come a long, long way in the last couple of years too, hasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, there is a lot of similarities in the two. They're both big bodies. They're both very strong defenders and with a really strong running game. And there's a lot to like about them, and the similarities are pretty obvious. Yeah, I think one of my favourite pastimes is to pick fantasy teams. And I'll tell you what, if I was picking an all-time Raiders team, I think Jackie Boy would have to find his way into the centres outside Laurie.
Really?
Yeah.
All-time Canberra, you've already got Whiten in there.
Yeah, well, he's a test player now. He hasn't won a premiership, but I think such has been his sort of his standard for the last couple of years. I think I'd have to slot him in there, partnering Big Mal in the centres. If not, he would definitely be on the bench, but he'd be in that 17 for sure, yeah.
All right, I want 2 names just quickly because I know we're getting sidetracked here because I just feel like we're at the pub having a chat, but if 2 names.
Well, I am having a beer.
Yeah, what's up, mate? Mate, as if I'm not. I've also got a scotch as well.
Excellent.
2 names quickly. Who in your all-time Canberra side are on the wings?
Oh, you know what? That's probably the hardest one.
No, come on. No, right now, bang. Just go.
Well, I'm going to go with Noah Nandruku for, if for nothing else, for entertainment value. He was so flamboyant. And the other one, that is super difficult.
Oh, yeah.
You know what? I'm going to go for a modern name. I might go with Jordan Rabana.
Wow. Okay, I like that because there's not enough people out there that are willing to put it on the line and put a modern day guy out there because look, in 10 years he probably will be in the same spot anyway. So I'm glad you said that, mate. And he's done a lot for the club, Jordan Rapana, and I'm glad he's back this year because he might actually. Before what? He's supposed to go back to Japanese rugby or whatever it is. He might actually win a comp before he leaves. So, fingers crossed.
I think it might even be his performances this year that have swayed me. I think, Canberra, even though they're travelling 4th or 5th at the minute, they've been a little bit inconsistent, but he himself has been really solid. I think he's been one of their best in every game he's played.
All right, let's get back to it. Let's jump in. Let's go to July 2nd. And I think this game, I think you might have seen this as yourself on Fox at some point too, Frenchie. It's a game at North Sydney Oval on July 2nd, and you just go down to the Bears 25-10. Now, the reason I bring this up is it's a bit of a cheeky little plug for another podcast I'm doing called Top of the Props. And I just spoke to a bloke the other day called Gary Larson, who you might know, who's a
legend,
an almighty player. And I'm very happy to call him a cousin-in-law by marriage. And he was nice enough to let me give him a call at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning, which meant I couldn't drink Saturday night, which is crazy. But yeah. We'll move on from that. But he basically said too. He said that the Bears of '94, that they were a great team. And there were so many teams coming to get Canberra as well, because even though the Broncos were back-to-back 92-93, you already mentioned yourself. You said that the Broncos were, I guess, after 2 years back-to-back, it's you can't blame them for being, taking a year off and spluttering a little bit and losing a few games here and there. So I think a lot of people at that time thought Canberra were the team to beat. And then the Bears come up, they knock them off 25-10. I'm trying to defend the Bears here, but as a Raiders fan, or looking back on '94, who were the Canberra's biggest threats, or was it more about Canberra losing it themselves on the biggest day?
Yeah, look, at the start of the year, I definitely would have said Brisbane is the biggest threat, and rightfully so, because the defending premiers from back to back, and we always sort of knew that, when you're looking at the talent on paper, it was always, for those few years, it was between Canberra and Brisbane as to who had the best squad. But I'll tell you what, the Bears weren't far behind. They were a quality team right across the park. A super strong forward pack. You've obviously just alluded to with Gary Larson, but with the likes of David Fairley and Billy Moore. And then they had, of course, the great Greg Folino running around out there too. They were a super impressive team. Incidentally, when you're talking about Canberra wingers, one of their best that didn't get a premiership.
Sean Hoppy.
Sean Hoppy.
Yeah.
He is a fantastic player. Kiwi Test player, and I was devastated when he left the Raiders to go to North. But they were definitely up there. When you're talking about teams that you knew you would have to play your best against, I'm sure that Canberra were always looking at North. And I know as a supporter, I was always a little bit worried about when they were playing the Bears.
So there might have been a bit of origin hangover, whatever you want to call it, but after that, the Raiders, they win 8 straight to go into the finals. So at this point, and I did a little bit of calculation, Matthew, on the calculator on the computer anyway.
Yep.
And in those 8 games before the final, so we're talking about every game leading into round 22 and including round 22. In that 8 straight run to the finals, 308 against 90. So this team is fucking primed.
Yeah, absolutely. They were red hot, and I tell you, as a 16-year-old at the time, mad rugby league supporter, was all I cared about. In winter time anyway, it wasn't cricket in summer and footy in winter. But and I was cock-a-hoop every week, and I thought, there's no way anyone's going to beat us in any given week. This is, we've got it all wrapped up, and my prediction was nearly correct. I'm sure I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but as you say, 8 in a row, and I can't remember too many specifics about that period, but I just remember thinking there's no team that can beat this Raiders team. We've got it. It's too good.
We spoke about Mullins, a great running fullback. And if there was one thing about his game that I guess you didn't really need it too much then, but he wasn't the ball player. I guess you compare to other fullbacks now. Daly, definitely a running 5'8", who did have a passing game, but was definitely a running 5'8". Steve Walters was a big body and one of the greatest hookers to ever play the game. But again, I guess, wasn't as creative a player as someone like Ricky Stewart. So when you look at those 3 legendary players, how important was Ricky Stewart as a halfback, as a pure halfback? And do you guys win, or are you guys as successful if we delete Ricky Stewart from the squad over that whole period? So we're talking, since Ricky Stewart gets to the club, we're talking the 89 win, the 90 win, 91 loss, and then the 94 win, and through that period where he's the Rothman medalist as well. Where does Canberra stand if they never sign Ricky Stewart from Rugby Union?
Oh yeah, look, I think it's fair to say they definitely would not have been as successful. I wouldn't say they would not have won a premiership because they still have.
I reckon they would have won. I reckon they would have won at least one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And particularly, I think '94 they would have learnt pretty well how to manage a little bit better than obviously '93 when the wheels fell off when Ricky was out. But look, I never. If you ask me to grade their players from best player to worst, Ricky wouldn't have been number one. But it may have been a fair argument to say he was their most important player. Not their best, but their most important. Yeah, because as you say, they had so much strike power and so many strong runners. But he was the absolute general. It's probably fair to say that in my lifetime watching footy, probably the single most dominant in terms of guiding the team around the park that I've seen. Other teams probably share that responsibility a little bit more, but he was absolutely the general. It didn't matter who the captain was, whether it was Mal or whether it was Daly in later years. Ricky was the boss of that team on the field. Yeah, he absolutely said what was happening, and the forwards made it happen, and everyone else listened and did their job. And we haven't even mentioned his actual kicking and passing game yet, which were absolutely immaculate. I think you listen to Joey Johns talk, and how much he took out of Ricky Stewart, how much he modelled his game on him, his passing game, his kicking game, and it's probably fair to say that he's not the best kicking and passing game that I've seen. He's definitely right up there.
Oh, look, and I'll go one step further myself and say that I think Ricky Stewart could control a game and win a game if his side was pinned in their own half for the entire game. I reckon Ricky Stewart had a better vision from his own 30 and pushing a team downfield than, say, even an Andrew Johns. I think Andrew Johns inside the attacking half was 100 times to play Ricky Stewart. But Ricky Stewart could win you a game against the run play just with his kicks and just get up his players a little bit more. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just think he was incredible. Which game was it? The 90 grand final where I reckon the 90 grand final he punted about 45 torpedoes downfield and everyone standing on its point took a left or right and went over the touchline. I haven't seen a player be able to do that before.
Yeah. Actually, one of I'm no doubt a lot like yourself. I watched a hell of a lot of footy during this whole lockdown period, and one of the things I really marvelled about was the 1990 grand final. Not just Ricky's kicking game, but Ricky and Greg Alexander. The two of them. You go a long way before you see another game where two halfbacks have such a battle of how great the kicking games were. But yeah, absolutely. I take your point. You compare him to the likes of a more modern sort of player like Joey, who, let's face it, was a complete player. Ricky wasn't going to score 3 tries in any game, but he definitely had the ability to control the game and to guide a team around better than anyone else, including the great Barry Johns, I think.
I see this to Gary Larson on top of the props the other day as well, is that my Uncle Paulie recorded every game of the 94 final series on VHS, and I had him for years, Frenchie. And I wrote an article about it for the 81stminute.com saying that the 94 finals is the greatest final series ever because every single game, it was huge crowds. Every game was a classic. Every game was tense. The sun was out. It was, it looked 30, 35 degrees every day. The smallest crowd the entire series was 33,641.
Yeah, well.
Just quickly, as a kid watching the finals, did you get to go to any of those finals games back in the early 90s at the SFS?
Yeah, you know what? I didn't go to a Raiders game in that series, but I did go to the North and Brisbane
Oh,
final.
the Jason Taylor field goal.
Yeah, and wow, what a game! That was fantastic. You know, I had a couple of mates that were hardcore Brisbane fans, and and still are. One of them so much so that he sort of moved to Brisbane as an adult. I wouldn't say he went there solely because of the Broncos, but I think it had a lot to do with it. So he was
Really?
as big a Broncos fan as I was a Raiders fan. And it was my under 16 team. We got the minibus and went in, and I had a couple of mates that were North fans as well. So for us, sort of that were neutral, it was just a fantastic day to be at the footy, to watching an awesome game of footy. But yeah, I remember it well. I can still remember that game really well. Just such a fantastic atmosphere and such great footy. Yeah.
So 9 in a row, first week of the finals, qualifying final, Canberra 26, the Bears 12. That's 9. And you go through and you play the major semi, and Canterbury get up 19-18. And again, Canterbury, just the thorn in the side, minor premiers again. They just don't go away. And then you go through and you play the Bears again, and you put them away 22-9, and there's that old saying, the Bears, they still defeat from the jaws of victory. There's a famous moment where Lomax gets sent off, which costs him a spot in the grand final.
Yeah.
And then there's a square up where Gary Larson gets sent off for a spear tackle on David Furner. As a Raiders fan, even looking back at it on hindsight and knowing what happens in the grand final, did you think, there was no stopping Canberra, even though they lost to the Bulldogs 19-18, or was it still, it's still a grand final, there's still two teams in this?
Yeah, no, I did. Even when we lost to the Bulldogs, I was I wouldn't say absolutely confident, but definitely outwardly confident. And let's say I was 99% sure that we'd still get there. That game where we lost against the Bulldogs 19-18, absolute crack of a game first of all. But even that, and that's one of those ones I rewatched not too long ago. But it was just one of those games where Canberra were just that little bit off. And again, not taking anything away from that great Doggies team, because they were a sensational team. But Canberra with 3 or 4 just unforced errors in that extra time period, which was an absolute nail biter. And that was I'd love to see footy like that again, where we didn't automatically go to golden point, but you had 10 minutes of extra time. Ricky Stewart and Laurie Daly both hit the upright with different attempts at field goal. And then, of course, the man with the golden boot, Dal Halligan, kicks it with about, a minute to go or so to get the Doggies over. But, yeah, look, again, I remember a bit of banter with some Canterbury mates at school. And I said, yeah, no worries, that's all right. We'll get you in 2 weeks. And it didn't really matter who we were playing the next week, even though, as we spoke about before, that North team, they were quality. And I knew the Raiders would have to put in their best performance, but they pretty much did. And as you said, I can't remember what that score was. You might have it in front of you there, but I think it was by about 15 or so points or so when we got the North Sydney Bears again. And of course John Lomax. That was the story at the time. High shot and sent off and. If anything was going to sort of knock us over, would be someone being suspended from the grand final. But of course, again, I know I'm jumping ahead again a bit, but it brought in one of the all-time great fairy tales of Paul Osborne.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is, which we'll get to in a second as well. But one thing I haven't touched on, and I've waited to speak about this bloke, because I'm sure that you're about to say the same thing. But Mau Meninga, so. This is going to be his final first grade game in Australia. He's done everything. And he's the kind of bloke where, and I've said this before with other people in interviews, and I've seen him walk into a function and everyone stops and there's like an aura around the big fella. And he's such a nice bloke, and you shake his hand and you feel like you've been touched by God. So to put it into perspective, you've got Ricky Stewart, you've got Laurie Daly, you've got Steve Walters, you've got Brad Clyde, and plus everyone else. But to them, to see Mau Meninga win a grand final, that's how high self-esteem esteem they held him in, was the fact that, we're legends of the game, but this guy's on another plateau. We need to send Mau Meninga off in his final game with the premiership.
Yeah. And exactly right. And, it's funny the way you remember things, because I remember thinking at the time that every time a legend of the game retires and they're playing the grand final, that team wins. And up to that point, that had held true. I was going back and thinking of Mick Cronin and Ray Price in
Mortimer,
86.
88.
Yeah, exactly. And then Royce Simmons in 91.
Yep.
Got the Panthers there, maiden premiership, and then so again, I just felt like the footy gods were on our side, and not only were we such a great team, but I thought, well, there's no way we're going to lose when it's now the last game. So but as you say, look, obviously he still has that aura, and probably enhanced even more so now. After his that stint as the Maroons coach and everything, but at the time he was one of those guys that I remember thinking that as a player for the Raiders, I didn't think, and it's going to sound funny, but I didn't think he was that intimidating. But I guess it was because no one messed with him on the field. Who would? But he never tried to sort of beat up on the other team or overtly intimidate them.
Yeah.
So I always thought he was not sort of in any way like an enforcer for the Raiders.
He was just a big bear. These big, beautiful eyes.
Yeah. But then, obviously there's a reason that he never got in any sort of a scuffle, because people weren't idiots, and that was sort of getting a little bit off track. And that was reinforced a few years later when he, exhibition bout with Mark Jacko Jackson. You remember that one?
Oh, he killed him.
And Mal punched the shit out of him, and that's what I remember thinking. Oh, gee. Well, he is a hard man.
Yeah, no, I think the other bloke, what was his name again? Wacko Jacko?
Yeah.
I think he was a bit lippy, mate, and I think Big Mal was happy to do that. But I can you imagine? Can you remember one fight Big Mal ever got in on the field?
No.
I don't think so.
And once again, the only time I remember him seeing even sort of, even hinting that he might, was in this period there, and I was watching. Actually, it might have been this game that we were talking about earlier with the Broncos, where the Friday night game, and Alan Cairn shoved, I think it was Laurie Daly after he scored a try, and Big Mal just came screaming over and gave him the biggest push, and then the pointed directly at him, didn't say a word, and that was
That's enough.
Yeah.
That's enough. So we get to the grand final, and look, from the very first, literally the first second, Martin Bella knocks on, and again, with hindsight, it's just nothing goes right for Canterbury. It's just a poor old day for the Bulldogs, and Canberra it's a culmination of the frustration of 93, the combination of great players that have already tasted blood of grand finals in yesteryear, and then all these other gun players that have come into play with them as well. Let's talk about Paul Osborne for a minute. It's I think his 135th first grade game and his last. And I've spoken to a few Dragons fans in the past, and they said, yeah, Ozzy Osborne was a good player at the Dragons. He never reached his potential. And he was basically sitting behind the likes of Lomax, Pongia, young Hetherington was kind of coming on as well. David Wesley, the same. But then Tim Sheens throws it to Osborne and says, you're starting. And, mate, honestly, it was like he was possessed by Arthur Beetson in that first half. He was incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you said Lomax and Hetherington, because they were earmarked as the young, up-and-coming front rowers, not just for Canberra, but sort of in the competition in general. They were both such good young forwards. Wesley in particular, he probably didn't go on to have the career that was predicted for him, but when he was, in his early 20s as a Barnstable front row,
he was a tearaway,
Looked like being absolutely anything. But so any Raiders fan at that time, when it was confirmed that Lomax was suspended, assumed that probably Wesley or potentially Hetherington would start in that position. But of course, when you think back, and it makes more sense when you look at it from that '94 perspective, where you didn't have the the interchange. Once you were off, that was it. It was perfect decision. And he didn't play that full half for Osborne. He went on there and he probably played 20 minutes. But obviously, Tim Sheen said, you're going to go out there and you're going to give it all you've got until you can't anymore. And that's it. And we see exactly what he did. But, even if you never saw another game from Paul Osborne, that 20 minutes just showcased what a player he was. There were very few front rowers getting around that had that sort of silky smooth touch. And, the way he could throw that dummy and offload, he was just such a skillful player. And I can actually remember when he was at Dragons earlier, I was always entertained watching him because on his day he'd have that little show and go and he'd bust the line and offload, and he was always a great player to watch, and obviously another player who had the perfect send-off. Yeah,
and I'm glad he got that too, because he obviously went on to do a few things in admin, and he's got a big family and all the rest, and obviously very well liked in the rugby league community. But I just wonder what would be saying about Paul Osborne, if anything, if he didn't have that moment. So I'm glad he got it.
Yeah, exactly right.
Another big moment, which I've just scribbled and I've circled and underlined several times, where you're talking about big Ozzy Osborne, and I've just got here Daly's try. So, Frenchie, how many times have you watched the replay of your favourite player, Laurie Daly, and not even the first time when he comes off the back and he's 50 out, and then he gets ankle tapped? How good is the front-on version of that, where he's pumping and he's going, and he's going for the try line, and then he's ankle tapped? How good is that?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's probably fair to say, yeah, that's my favourite.
But that's Laurie Daly in a nutshell, isn't it, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, those, the Pistons pumping, and especially when you see that front on view, you think, shit, I wouldn't like to tackle him actually. Yeah, he's a big lad. He was probably 95 kilos or so, and he had everything going at that moment, and there was nothing going to stop him, even that ankle tap. Yeah, but that was as I say, obviously my favourite moment from that grand final. Yeah.
And the other one too that I've written down here, and I've put a little bit more detail in it, and just watched a little bit of it back on YouTube this afternoon, and we talk about Meninga again, and obviously he goes on the Kangaroo Tour, and he finishes with an Ashes win, and it's the final Kangaroo Tour as we know it, and he's the final captain. But the thing I want to mention about this, and I don't know if you got a chance to see it, and if anyone else out there is listening tonight or listening back another day, just take a moment, because Meninga wasn't in the defensive line when he took this intercept. So Canterbury are 45 out from their own line. Daryl Halligan goes into dummy half. It goes to Polomana, to Jason Smith, and he's just thinking, we've lost. We need to do something. And without looking, he just turns left and just throws this big airborne ball across field. And I paused it from the moment Smith releases it to where Meninga is. And I reckon he's about 15 metres away from the ball. But he gets there that quickly. And within about half a second, he palms away Jared McCracken. Ray Warren's intercepted by Meninga. Fatty saying, "Go, big fella!" And Rabs is, "The crowd roars, the crowd roars." And I also picked this up, Frenchie, and I dare you to look back on it if you have a few more beers tonight and watch the game in full. At 1 minute, 1 hour, 54 and 10 seconds, the great referee Greg McCallum, who was officiating that day, you can just see him in the background in the corner, his full face, and he's looking up and he's looking at the Raiders players, and Big Mouth just scored the try. He's got a smile on his face, and he can't believe he's out there as well. I mean, that is a moment, and I've spoken about this to other people as well. And James Smith, the former editor of Inside Sport, who's a Panthers fan, we were speaking about this. Just the magic and the drama of all the things that happen at the old SFS, and this was another one of them.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and I can still picture the exact fist pump at the end of it after Alf got up. He was, exactly what we were talking about earlier, but. Where you get these legends of the game, that they win their grand finals, but that was just the perfect send-off, the icing on the cake. The other thing I like about that, is often overlooked, is the fact that he didn't, as you'd see a lot these days, that, a legend scores a try like that, they'll take the kick to goal as well.
Yeah.
Mel didn't bother, that wasn't really something that he was, really too interested in. He's got his his beautiful farewell, and he didn't feel the need to go and take that icing on the cake, I guess, and he just let the main man David Byrne pot it over nicely, and away we go. But yeah, exactly, a legend of the game, and first player to finish off at the SFS. And as you say, I think everyone out there realise the enormity of the occasion, including the calendar.
Two more questions for you, Frenchie, before I let you go. The first one is that I think Tim Sheens is one of the greatest coaches of the modern era. But there always would have been an asterisk next to his name because we always talk about how good the squad was at Canberra. Yeah. Was it important for him to come back all those years later and win a premiership for West Tigers for the younger fans, or will you always regard Tim Sheens as a legendary coach in his own right for what he did with Canberra and that squad?
Yeah, look, it's a funny one because I've always been of the opinion that, when people say who's the greatest coach ever, it's not a conversation I like to even enter into because I'm like, well, how would I know? How many of them have coached me?
Yeah.
It's so difficult to say who is a great coach unless you've been coached by someone. It's not like watching a game of footy. You can see what the players are doing out there. So,
yeah.
But I think in most occasions, in fact, I think the only instance that I can think of in my life watching footy where realistically the best team of the season, or the most talented team, the best squad, didn't win the grand final was that 2005 West Tigers squad. It was a fantastic season, and it was an absolute fairy tale for them, and no one could ever say that they didn't deserve it. But purely when you just look at the squad itself, I don't think anyone could really say that that was the best squad.
Yeah.
But that was such an obviously an amazing coaching job. And it wasn't just that season; it was the seasons that led up to it. Tim obviously had a vision, and he could see that he was building towards something. And the way he was able to harness that young squad's talent and enthusiasm and bring it into just the perfect environment where they could blossom. That was something else. And I think that really did cement his legacy as one of the great coaches. Whereas you could say, I think it would be fair to say, if it wasn't that, you say, yeah, of course, obviously the guy could coach, but look at the players he had. And that's what you see so much of in these, when we have these discussions. But yeah, I think that really sets him apart.
All right, so the final question, Frenchie, for you is, as a Raiders fan, and then you see, and we've spoken about tonight several times, Broncos versus Raiders, and how similar they were as clubs, how powerful they were, the rep plays they had, how much sway they had in the game, and then to see the Broncos go on 97, 98, 2000, 2006. Can you believe Canberra haven't won another comp since 94?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for sure. I think it is difficult to believe because they definitely had their chances. I think most people, besides the hardcore fans there, forget to. I was going to say 2005, but 95. 95, the Raiders were as good, if not better. Mal had retired, but everyone else had seemed to have stepped it up a gear, and we were red hot. I think we may have been equal minor premiers, maybe missed out on the minor premiership on for and against. I think that was that year where Manly let in about 20 points for the entire season. Their defence was unheard of. But and I remember the first week of the finals in 95 when we absolutely blitzed the Broncos. It was about 30-odd points. And I thought, we're here, we've got it. There's no stopping us. And then just fell over in consecutive weeks. And it wasn't to do with injuries like in 93, but just didn't play our best footy and came up against a team that on paper they looked like they should have beaten 30-0. And it was that Canterbury team that had that fairy tale 95 series and knocked them out. So that was the end of it. And I remember I've never been more shocked in my life as a rugby league supporter than that 95 season. So that was the one where we definitely should have got. But look, apart from that, it's just a lot of inconsistency. We've had a lot of injuries at the wrong time and a lot more difficulty in recruiting quality players. Back then, I guess You had a guy like Sheensy who was so good at recruitment, not just coaching, but he was able to tap into those sort of markets that no one else really knew about, like when he brought Ponga and Lomax and everyone over, and he brought Nandruku over from Fiji. Whereas those there's not any of those untapped areas anymore. You don't have a guy out there who's just bringing the best over from somewhere that no one else is. So that's become a lot more difficult in this day and age. So, and obviously last year, I was there last year and we had it, but I'm not going to be one of those guys that say we was robbed, because I think we had a couple of tough calls, but we also had every opportunity to win it, and just didn't come up with the goods when we needed to. So, surprised that we haven't got one, but that's footy, isn't it?
And look, that just means the next one's going to taste even better, mate. So thanks for being with us tonight, Frenchie. I really appreciate it, and we'll get you back on shortly, mate. Thank you very much.
No worries, Curtis. Always a pleasure, mate.